Wow. You know, tropical houseplants are amazing. Look at the size of this one. Actually, this is actually started another floor down. This is one of the babies. They're absolutely spectacular plants. What we're going to do is show you today on how you can propagate some plants. One way is to go ahead and treat it like I'm going to treat the one downstairs and then put it in water. And if you take a look, you can see I've got some little white roots on here. Aren't they adorable? And they're going to grow and become a big tree. So we're going to show you how to do some of this. I'm going to introduce you to some other houseplants that are just spectacular, easy to grow in your own house. And then I'm going to introduce you to some gorgeous orchids. Look at these babies. They're so pretty. And you know, they're not that difficult to grow. Hey, if I can grow them, you can grow them too. So join me for Delmarva Gardens coming up next right here on Pack 14. Don't you just love tropical plants? You can actually play hide and seek with them too. Tropical plants are supposed to grow. They live in the tropics, and the warmer the area is and the more moisture they have by the rainforest and all that, they can get to be quite large, as we saw upstairs. However, sometimes they get a little bit out of control. So what we're going to do with this one is we're going to go ahead and try to take control of this. I'm going to go ahead and do something called air layering. There's a couple of different ways to propagate plants. You can go ahead and have them like take a cutting and stick it either in water or in some soil or some sand, and then it'll develop roots. Or you could go ahead and do something called air layering, which basically you're going to go ahead and leave the plant all together. You're going to take off some leaves and take off some of the bark, and it will still go ahead and survive because it's actually getting all the water and nutrients it needs from the roots here. Okay, so this is a way to go ahead and get a plant to grow without really damaging it. And sometimes when you're talking about leaves this big, you know, they can take a lot, they lose a lot of water. The larger the leaf, the more water they lose. What I'm talking about is leaves actually are leaking water on the underside of every leaf. So you can't really see, but on the underside of this leaf, there's a whole bunch of little cells that open and close. And when they open, they drip water out. So it's just a little bit of moisture. And that's why people who have houseplants have a lot more moisture in their house than people who don't have houseplants. So this is really a good thing. It's like nature's giving you humidity, which I think is awesome too. So, okay. First thing, before we go any further than this, we're going to leave it there, you have to have a couple of things. You need to have a medium that you can go ahead and use to wrap around what you're going to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the leaves off, then I'm going to score the bark and take the bark off, just in a small area, and then I'm going to wrap it up with sphagnum moss. So here's some sphagnum moss. People use sphagnum moss because it is pretty sterile. Sphagnum moss grows in a kind of a bog, and it's very, very acidic. So anything that lands in it basically stays there. It's so acidic it doesn't really decompose because there's very few things that can live in that really, really acidic area. But when you go ahead and process it and introduce water and other things, then it helps to grow. This is actually what they call hydrophobic, which means that when you first add water, it fights it. So sphagnum moss does fight water. But once it's wet, look at this. It gets really, really wet. So this is our sphagnum moss, and I've gone ahead and added water to it, and it took a while, but it's pretty good. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, cut off some leaves. What I want to do is I want to keep some of the top leaves. So I'm going to keep the first top leaves. I'm going to cut this one off, and this one, this little one here, this little one here, this one here, and I'm going to come down to right about, let's see, I got to leave that one there, okay? So I'm leaving 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to take this one off. Again, you don't want to have too many. There we go. So we've got those 3 leaves, all right, that'll be enough. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take the bark off right here. Hopefully it's just all right. So pull that off. There you go, just like that. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the top of the bark off. Where the bark is, there's actually a layer of growth tissue that is bringing water up from the roots, and that is xylem. It's called xylem up. And then there's also a layer called phloem that takes the sugars that are made by the leaves, and they send that sugar water down to the roots. Okay. So you see how I've gone ahead and scraped the bark and it's nice and green? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this area up with aluminum foil because that way it kind of holds all the moisture together. And what it should do is I should be able to put it here and wrap it around so that nothing actually falls on the ground. So let's see if we can do that. So I went ahead and put some here, and it's really, really wet. How can you tell it's wet? Well, when you squeeze it, water should come out. Okay, you really want it moist. Okay, good. All right. Put that there for the time being. This is the area where I had everything going, and I'm going to go ahead and put there. And wrap this around a little bit more. There we go. And grab it over here. And then, whoop. Thank goodness for the leaves. All right. All right, there we go. Okay, next thing I'm going to do. So I'm going to put a stake in here and go ahead and reattach the stake right here so that as the moisture comes out of here from the sphagnum, it'll go into the flower pot that's here. Now the reason why you want to have the sphagnum moss as wet as it is you want to encourage the plant to go ahead and make roots, and you want them to grow ahead and make the roots within this area. If that sphagnum moss dries out too much, then it's actually going to inhibit the root growth, and you don't want that. You want the roots to go ahead and grow out. So what you have to do is you kind of figure out, okay, maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then you open it up and see what it looks like. And if you have to put it back in, it's okay too, even if the roots are just beginning to grow. Sometimes people like to use saran wrap because it's clear, but that doesn't always work as well because if the roots basically hit that, sometimes they can burn a little bit because they're such tiny little delicate things. So, okay, good. That is amazing, isn't that? Okay, once this is done and we've got a really healthy plant, then we can go ahead and trim this. So we can trim it here or a little further down so that the plant is actually lower, and sometimes that'll cause the plant to actually branch out, which would be kind of fun. But when you have something as big and thick as this one over here, look at how thick that is. That's a good inch over here. If you cut that down, it might actually grow up from the bottom, but it might not. That would be a fun thing to do, though, to try to do that. If you look in here, you can see where it actually was here, coming straight up, and it was probably snipped off here, and this branch came over this way, and then just recently these two branches butted off on the same thing. So we could go ahead and cut this one off here, or cut it off up here, and take the whole weight that we have up here, and make a shorter plant for a short period of time, because as you know, these things can just basically grow up. That's all they know how to do, which is pretty cool though. All right. Let's take a look at some other plants. Oh, and before we go, I have got to share something that I think is pretty cool about these. These plants are tropical plants, and a lot of them are kind of like rubber trees. This is not a rubber tree, it's a fig, but like the Ficus benjamina and this one, they have a little bit of latex. So every time you prune it or a leaf falls off or is pulled off, there's some white latex. You can see some white latex here that dripped off. This one, this one, and this one, and here's another couple of spots right here. And I thought, wow, where is that coming from? And I noticed, see right here, this is still dripping And it's not from this, it's actually from cutting the leaf right here. And that's a little bit of white latex, which is pretty cool. So that will start hardening off. And that's why a lot of people say that, they don't want their animals to be chewing this because, they have some funky stuff up when they chew it. Well, if they chew something like this, they're going to get some latex in their mouth, and that's going to kind of give them kind of like a bubblegum look to it. It's not going to hurt the animal, but it's probably not the most appetizing thing to watch your pet do that. So just don't let them eat it. They won't die, but it's not going to look pretty. Oh, I love these trees. This is related. This is a Ficus benjamina. Some people call it the weeping fig because, again, they think it's in the fig family and all that. You can keep these very, very small. Take a look at the roots on these. This is amazing. The architecture of the roots is so beautiful. I'm so glad that they have it. But it can show you how the roots can go ahead and almost do like flying buttresses here. They can support themselves under really, really adverse windy conditions. I don't think you're going to find windy conditions inside, but anyways, it still does that. What this does, though, is the smaller the pot you keep it in, the smaller the amount of roots you have. And it's almost like treating the plant as a bonsai. You're keeping the roots small and the top small. Well, this one has already been planted and allowed to grow up real tall. So we can go ahead and prune this off, but you'd have to use a ladder. And I think we're just going to let it grow for a little bit longer and enjoy the fact that we have a canopy here. Cool. Sometimes when you have room to grow, you get to grow. Look at this beautiful plant. This is a beautiful Dracaena marginata, kind of like a dragon tree. I love the fact that they call it a Dracaena marginata. It's called that because every leaf has got a margin of dark red on the outside. So sometimes it's more obvious than others, but see this dark red rim right there and there. And it's just beautiful. Look at how healthy this is. Now this has been transplanted for a number of years and has had a chance to grow up. So this is almost 2 stories high too. Now this one again would be easy to go ahead and keep it lower if they wanted to. All you have to do is keep trimming. You can see a couple places where some of the plants decided to grow and said, no, not really. So this could be pruned off right here. And if you prune it, you want to go ahead and prune it like you would do almost any type of plants. Just prune it right there. See where that little area is right there? You want to put it right above that. That would be fine. But these guys are so beautiful. Now, if I was going to prune this, I would want to go ahead and prune it somewhere where there had been a leaf. Every one of these little lines right here is where a leaf bud had been, okay? And so if you wanted to go ahead and grow something, you want to make sure you grow it close where the leaves were. So you wouldn't want to do it in between here. You'd want to do it right on, like just right above that area. Just with like a pruning shears or something like that. Neat. I just love the way how it kind of grows around. It looks like it's dancing. I really love that. And these are really good for you because houseplants provide a lot of oxygen and making it healthier for you to live. But I think they also provide a lot of wonderful ambience that makes you feel like you're more in touch with nature. So cool. There's another houseplant that was brought into a lot of people's houses when they had tissue culture first started. And it was the type of houseplant that was very hard to grow in the beginning. And then all of a sudden they decided, well, if we propagate it by tissue culture, we can have a whole bunch of them. And all of a sudden they were everywhere. They're hard to find now. So let me introduce you to this real cool plant. Come on. Oh, I love these plants. Okay, these are called a Ming Aurelia. And they look like something out of a beautiful old Chinese painting. They have that gorgeous, graceful growth where it kind of moves around, almost like the branches are dancing around each other, which I think is so cool. But more than anything else, if you look up here at the foliage, it is so light and airy. It looks an awful lot like it's very dissected, so sort of like the delicacy of a Japanese maple, in a sense, but this is the house plant, so it's just so gorgeous. And like I said, originally it was sort of a difficult plant to go ahead and propagate, but when they started using tissue culture, what they did is they would go ahead and take the top growth of a branch right here, and they would go ahead and take it off with a very, very sharp needle or almost like a scalpel, and they would put it in a form of a sauce or agar, and they would let the cells divide and divide, divide. So you'd have a very, very small little clump of cells, and then they would divide and multiply until they were like thousands, and then they could take each one and put it in a separate little container, and it would turn into a plant like this. So you wouldn't have to go ahead and take a whole bunch of cuttings and then wait for them to grow. You could go ahead and take from cells and get them all to grow like crazy. And I remember they used to be for sale back in the 70s, and now they're hard to find, but this one obviously loves living here. It's absolutely gorgeous. So pretty. And easy to take care of, too. This is an amazing plant. Notice how the leaves cascade, and they also twirl and all that. I keep talking about plants dancing. These guys are always in motion like this. This is called a ponytail palm, because when you look at it, it looks like somebody's got a ponytail up at the top, and all the hair just kind of swings around as you dance. But if you come all the way down the trunk, you notice how the base is really, really huge. So some people used to call it elephant foot, but ponytail is a lot more fun. And these, again, quite often are sold when they're very, very tiny, and if they're well loved and well cared for, they really, really grow. So you can see how this one has been turned around occasionally because it was moving in this direction and now it's moving in that direction, and the very, very top is moving back again. So by turning the houseplant a quarter of a turn every week, you keep it from going too far this way or too far that way. You just keep it dancing, okay? Now, this plant right here is another Dracaena. We saw the Dracaena marginata. This is called a Dracaena tricolor because it has the lime green, the dark green, the lime green, but in between the lime green and the dark green, it's white. So it's 3 colors, tricolor. Now, one of the common names of this one, instead of dragon plant like the Dracaena, this one is often called the corn plant. And if you look at it, those leaves almost look like the corn that grows in the field, except for this is a tropical one, and there's nothing to eat off of this one. But again, it makes a wonderful house plant, lots of pretty colors, and it loves to be indoors because it likes the bright but indirect light most houses have. It likes the temperature that we live in because it's the same temperature that they like. So cool. Let's go see something that's in bloom right now, okay? One of the coolest things about growing plants indoors is sometimes you can get plants that will actually bloom for you. Now, I love African violets because they'll bloom, but these orchids are so happy here that I just had to share them with you. Now, this one right here is an orchid called a Dendrobium, D-E-N something or other. Anyways, it blooms right here where the new word is. You can see where this area right here is a little bit more fleshy, and there's going to be a spike that's going to come out here. So the holder right here will probably be moved over to that area, and then they can go ahead and hold it up. This is sometimes called, since it's hard to say Dendrobium, it's often called the dancing lady orchid because all the orchid flowers look like ladies with their skirts spread wide and their hands out like this, and then the little faces with their hair up. It's just adorable. So I'm just going to put this out of the way for the time being. So let me start out with this one right here because it's not quite in bloom, but this has rebloomed before. You can see right here, this was pruned back, and this one came back again. Now this one was pruned back also, and it was pruned back correctly because you want to go ahead and prune it maybe a little bit above where the last bloom was. And so that's why this branch right here is growing. So these are the buds, and they'll stay like this for a couple of weeks, but then this one is going to bloom first, and then this one, and then this, and they all last for weeks at a time, which is absolutely fabulous. What I love, though, is there are so many colors. I mean, quite often purple is a normal color, or white, or splotched, but there's also greens, and there's oranges, and lavenders. Anyways, take a look at this one right here. It's got reds and oranges and lavender right in the center of it. Isn't it adorable? And I love how they've gone ahead and allowed it to kind of arch over like that. So that's really cool. Right behind it, this is one also, but it's got the purple splotches in it. Now, I want you to take a look at right here. See how this sort of purple lip comes out like that? I'll put my hand underneath it. That is actually nature's version of a perch for a moth orchid actually a moth that will land here so it can go ahead and get the nectar and the pollen out of here so it can be pollinized. These plants actually are also the common name of the it's a Phalaenopsis, but it's called a moth orchid, and moths actually are needed to pollinize it. So here's another one. Again, it has that beautiful little perch right there. And notice how the color is different right in the center. Nature does that to say, hey, look, here's where you're supposed to come. Don't forget, you need to go ahead and find it right here. All the other parts of the flower right here, and that's just dressing and also by saying, hey, come here, come here. So here's one that's pure white with lavender. Like I say, they come in so many beautiful colors. Isn't that spectacular? Wow. A lot of people say that these are difficult to grow, and they really aren't. All you need to do is make sure that you water them once a week. Less is better than more. The easiest way to kill them is to overwater them. In the wild, these guys have roots. Let me see which one I can pick up that. I want to show you what type of roots these guys have. Okay. Now these roots right here are what they call aerial roots. So in the wild, these roots actually wrap around a tree and hold on to the tree. I've seen in the southern part of Florida where they'll go ahead and take these orchids and they will actually wrap some sphagnum moss around them or some bark around them and put it against the bark and then put a couple of bungee cords just to keep it there. And then the roots eventually kind of get the idea, oh, this is a tree, I can go ahead and wrap my roots around it. And so in the wild, every time it rains, it gets a little bit of water, but not a lot of water because the tree is a canopy over top of it. So it just kind of gets a little bit of misting every now and then. These don't require a lot of fertilizer either because in the wild, every time it rains, some of the nutrients from the leaves sprinkle down on this too. Cool, easy peasy. This is something everybody can go ahead and grow and just have fun with it. They bloom every year or every other year depending on your light and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, I just wanted to share these with you guys. I hope you've enjoyed this walk through this lovely indoor jungle. You don't have to have a lot of room for houseplants. If you have a small amount of room, you can get a small plant and keep it small. Or if you have a 2-story house, you can go ahead and let it get big. It's up to you. Thank you so much for joining me for Delmarva Gardens right here on Pack 14.